Roy Haynes was born in Boston, Massachusetts on March 13th, 1925. He made his professional debut in 1944, about when bebop was born, and already in 1945 he made his debut with Lester Young. Some of the stuff he plays with Lester, or Press, is truly modern, over-the-bar line stuff, and Mel Lewis actually called him the first avant-garde drummer. Soon he also became a member of Charlie Parker's band, doing some extraordinary recordings. During the 50s, Roy was on the tour with Sarah Vaughan, and a bit absent from the New York scene, but he came back and did a great number of recordings in the late 50s, early 60s. For instance with Thelonious Monk and Jackie McLean. He was also Elvin's go-to guy when he needed a substitute in the Coltrane Quartet in the 60s. And the recording from 1963 from Newport is a true classic when Roy gives that quartet kind of another vibe. Also in 1968 he recorded the Now He Sings, Now He Sobs record with Chick Corea, which became kind of a new standard on how to play trio drums. Roy has always been nicknamed Snap Crackle, much because of his snappy snare drum playing. But ever since the recording of Now He Sings, Now He Sobs, there's kind of a misconception that Roy is a very light drummer, which he definitely is in many occasions. But he's also a heavy guy, and this is something I want to explore in these videos. He was definitely one of the first to break up the hi-hat playing, not playing it on 2 and 4, but breaking up the comping, something that drummers like Jack DeJohnette and Bill Stewart has made their trademarks as well, thanks to Roy Haynes. Roy has continued to make recordings in the 80s, 90s and in the new century, and everything is worth checking out and studying. Also, very recently, great New York drummer Hugh Farnsworth did a beautiful tribute to Roy Haynes on YouTube, interviewing some people and that kind of stuff. So definitely check out that kind of stuff. Thank you, Joe. Hi everybody, and welcome to another Swedish experience. Today we're gonna talk about the one and only Roy Haynes. You know, Roy Haynes has always been the sharpest dresser in the entire jazz world. So at least I made an effort. I've seen Roy Haynes play live once in Stockholm, Sweden, with his Fountain of Youth band. I think it was around 2008 or something. And the concert was fantastic, and Roy played like, you know, I can't even start to describe it. And you know, just by seeing Roy move and talk and go through the crowd, I think I became a tiny bit better jazz drummer just by witnessing that. Actually, okay, you know, there's so much. I'll give you some record listening tips for Roy Haynes in the end of this video. There's also some nice stuff on check out the interviews, lots of interviews on YouTube, and this one episode from this radio show by Lawrence Schoenberg from the late 80s with Mel Lewis. There's an entire episode where Mel talks about Roy Haynes and gives a lot of fantastic musical examples from the early years with Lester Young to some later stuff to the when he played with the Coltrane Quartet, giving that quartet kind of another vibe from the Elvin stuff, but as magnificent and cool. So check out all of that. I've been so into Roy Haynes lately, so I've transcribed lots of new stuff, and I promise you, the Matrix traits from Now He Sings, Now He Sobs will come in Roy Haynes-Isms too. I'm working on them right now, actually. Pretty difficult. Okay, so we're gonna look at some Roy Haynes traits that's from a record by Kenny Barron called, looks like this, Wanton Spirit, with Kenny Barron on piano, Charlie Hayden on the bass, and Roy Haynes on the drums. And these traits from the song Take the Coltrane includes so many of true Roy Haynes-isms, so I thought this would be a nice place to start exploring Roy Haynes. Before we begin, let's just take a few minutes to talk about the blues. You know, the blues, one of the most common song forms in jazz, 12 bars. And there are some different structures we actually can use. Check out this little lesson in the lesson about the blues. So, since I don't really do Hollywood scripts, there has to be a couple of these intermissions. And this is Sweden, by the way, believe it or not. The blues. I'm actually reading a book right now, Stomping the Blues by Albert Murray, considered a modern classic. It doesn't only, it's not only about the early musicians and the early blues structures. It's also very much about the emotional aspect of the blues, and it's super interesting. So check it out, Stomping the Blues. Okay, so here's pretty basic blues structure. First we have a statement/question, then we have a statement/question repeated, maybe slightly varied, in bar 5 to 8. And finally a conclusion/answer in the final section, the final 4 bars. This basic structure is actually something that many drummers build their blues solos over, including Roy Haynes on the solo we are talking about today, as we will examine. If we're just increasing the density a tiny bit by looking at the basic chord structure, the basic harmony of a blues, it opens up for many new possibilities, which I really hope to talk about in a video soon, how to build your drum solos over this. Okay, so when we do this thing that I do, transcribing stuff and learning how to play it, we can do it in kind of in 2 ways. Either by mimic, to trying to play exactly sound and feel wise as the original, or the other way is interpretation, that you more freely try to learn this in your own style. But the end goal for both of these is definitely to pick up some stuff to put in your own backpack, to your own library of stuff that you can use, that becomes yours. We're never trying to keep, for example, the mimic thing, because that's weird. So we make the stuff ours. In this case, in this Roy Haynes video, I definitely do interpretation. as you probably hear, I swing stuff between the trades way too much against what Roy would have done. Even in the solos I play with different feel. I swing some stuff too much. So I decided to, because Roy is super hard to mimic, so I decided to do the interpretation stuff on him, which I'm happy for. It works fine, and it makes it easier for me to pick up Roy stuff to put in my backpack. Okay, let's check out how Roy uses the basic blues structure as a foundation for this trade. Okay, let's listen to a really slow version of this one. Let's start with the first trade, and this is in 130, so it's 120 BPMs slower than the original. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the first trade. It contains some true Roy Haynes-isms. Let's take the first 4 measures. It starts with some crashes, and then we have one of the Roy Haynes licks. It goes like this. It's a collection of 16th note groupings. 1, 2, 3. Let's do it quickly. 1, 2, 3, 4. And the first 4 measures goes like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. We have to have one thing in mind, and that is that Roy has very much his own phrasing. So, for example, the last bar is it sounds kind of straight, but maybe there's a tiny bit triplety feel over it. And Roy is many times in his comping, in his stuff he plays in the solos is kind of in between. Sometimes they're more to the straight side, sometimes more triplety, and sometimes completely in between. Okay, let's look at the start of this, the middle 4 bars in this blues. Goes like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Once again, a variation of the Roy Haynes lick. And this kind of stuff sounds so cool when in a faster tempo.
I totally forgot to talk about bars 7 to 8. My deepest apologies. But remember, this is totally free.
Okay, let's look at the final 4 bars of the first trade. We have triplets. And what many drummers do is playing, just right, left foot. But Roy puts the bass drum on the 1. 1, 2, 3, 4. But I've discovered actually that the stuff he plays, both in this trade and in the next, has to be foot left, right. And I think actually he does this very much. For example, these 4 bars, it's a figure that's actually a 3/4 phrase. That goes over the over the bar line, you could call it. So the last 4 bars of the first trade goes like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Just like in the first trade, Roy uses the same basic blues structure for this trade. The second trade. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so in the second trade, it starts with some. It sounds like flams, but in this tempo it's actually 16th notes. It goes like this. In 1/30. 1, 2, 3, 4. And bar 5 to 8 in the second trade is also the same kind of stuff. 1, 2, 3, 4. And the conclusion or answer is once again these triplets in that's foot, left, right. It just has to be, I think. Goes like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. That thing is actually my invention. It was just looked cool. And you heard one thing, I'm sure of. That it starts in triplet, but very soon it kind of slides over seamlessly into this. And then back to triplets. So everything once more. One, two, three, 4. And the third one. 1, 2, 3, 4. The third trade is perhaps a bit more subtle, but since Roy plays the same kind of stuff in bar 1 and bar 5, we can definitely connect it to the blues structure. Okay, the final trade, the third trade, starts out with some iconic Roy Haynes stuff. One, it goes like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. And this kind of stuff with the hi-hat and the drums is so much Roy Haynes. It'll come back in a while. The first 4 bars in the third trade continues with some stuff that's reminiscent of the second trade. Let's listen to the first 4 bars once more. 1, 2, 3, 4. And in bar 5, this stuff comes back. I'll play it for you. Here it is. 1, 2, 3, 4. Once more. 1, 2, 3, 4. And bar 5 to 8. 1, 2, 3, 4. And the conclusion, bar 9 to 12 is just kind of a lead in to the chorus. Okay, so I have actually 2 great tips for practicing this kind of solos. The first is practicing to the actual background, which in this case is 12-bar blues. So program it into your sequencer program or find it somewhere, a blues background, and practice to that, because then you will start to hear the phrases in a completely new and right context. So that's one thing. Also, this solo doesn't have the hi-hat on 2 and 4. Roy plays actually hi-hat in some places where I don't, because the hi-hats he makes I perceive as kind of ad-lib. You kind of do it a little bit when you feel like it, which is super cool, but just to be clear, today I don't do that. But to practice with the hi-hat on 2 and 4 is a great thing. You know, I always try to maintain a consistent foot pattern in my hi-hat, and I like to try to play this motion. Okay, so I had a little setback during this shooting. I had for the first time a hi-hat cam set up, but in the end it didn't work actually. So what I'm doing is that I'm always trying to maintain this rocking motion with my heel going on all 4, like this. So I hope you can see at least a little bit of that. Okay. Which can be actually quite complicated if there's much stuff going on in the bass drum. But I try to do it as practice. And it definitely keeps steadying up the timing. So that's 2 things. So I'll try to do them both at the same time here. We take the tempo down from 250 to 190. Let's check it out. Okay, as you noticed, I left it out in the third trade because it's very much like half open hi-hat. So you can do that. But in the first two trades are perfect for practicing to keep a steady hi-hat. And also I hope you heard how the phrases works when you hear the chords of the blues. Awesome! Okay, about some next installments in this series. I already said that Roy Haynes-Isms 2 probably will be about the Matrix solos. From Now He Sings, Now He Sobs. And I also have some cool brush trades from Reaching Forth, I think, the McCoy Tyner record. And then I really want to do a special on Roy's comping, because you know he was one of the first who started to break it up, not playing the hi-hat on 2 and 4, and sometimes he played with a very straight feel that somehow feels like swing and sounds just so good. You know, me and my friend, we used to talk about the Roy Haynes dance. And you know, drumming comes from tap dancing from the beginning, and in Roy's case it becomes so clear how closely related they really are. So I hope to do that in Roy Haynes-Isms 3.
So here are a few recordings to make you get started. There'll be more in Roy Haynes-Isms 2. Just remember, these are my personal preferences.
Some other news is that my website, davidnorberg.net, is up again. And on it you can find all the transcriptions and videos from my YouTube channel, including these Roy Haynes trades, under education free lessons. So check it out.
Also, I want to promote a new podcast called Oh That Jazz by my very good friend, Swedish great jazz drummer Olle Dernevik. You can find this podcast anywhere on Apple Podcast, on Spotify. There are a few really cool interviews out there now. And I also know that Olle has some really cool drummer interviews planned. Olle has such a great passion and enormous knowledge of jazz, so it will be so great to follow this podcast. Check it out!
And finally, if Mr. Roy Haynes sees this video, I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for all the music. You are as important to the evolution of jazz as Lester Young and Charlie Parker. Once again, thank you, Roy.